Good evening, everybody, and welcome to another session of hashtag Gather to Grow here on Food from Zanzi's Twitter Spaces. This is a very interactive platform where we talk about various things to do with agriculture. And tonight we're talking, should vertical farming replace conventional farming? We have Dr. Nadia Malan here, and then we have Zandile here as well. Zandile, I'm not sure, were you able to finish your introductions from before?
Yes, I was able to finish my introduction. Maluta was the one that was speaking when we got cut off.
Maluta can continue with his introduction and then we'll take it from there. Maluta, the floor is yours. Thanks.
Yeah, we must just cut to the chase. I'm an agri-economist, so I think that's enough.
Bye, Danki. Thank you so much. The conversation, it speaks for itself. You see the title, vertical farming versus conventional farming, and if it should replace conventional farming. What's the 101? Where do you all stand? What is your take on it? I'm going to start with Professor Malan, and then I'll go through the rest of the speakers. Professor Malan?
Vertical farming is usually hydroponics or aquaponics, but you can stack soil in bags and pack it up vertically. And that's usually what it refers to. Whereas conventional farming is really the green revolution farming, which is highly mechanized, rural, intense use of chemicals, intense use of implements, and also hybrid seeds, improved seeds, and genetically modified seeds.
Thank you so much. Zandile, obviously you are opting for vertical farming. Was this your first choice? Did you immediately say that you won't even try? And why? Maybe you can respond in that way.
Basically, like I was saying, I started as a conventional farmer. So vertical farming or hydroponic farming came through wanting to solve issues that we face as conventional farmers, like climate condition issues, and being able to produce better yields and being able to use your water efficiently. So that's basically one of the things that led us as a team to want to hydroponic farming. And when we started doing research, that's when we found out that with hydro, you can actually plant on smaller spaces and plant more yielding. You can use the resources of water as we recirculate our water much more better compared when we're doing conventional farming. And we can do it under cover without using the soil. And we can reduce on the risk that we're having in terms of the soil itself. Even though conventional farming has its own advantages and vertical farming has got its own advantages, but then sometimes you look at yourself as a conventional farmer to say when you don't have arable space, sometimes it would be best to actually combine both approaches and know best of the both, basically how to farm conventional and how to farm hydroponically so that you can be able to use your land efficiently and use it all. Such things and such researches is the one that led us to end up being able to go along this line and learning the other side of agritech.
Thank you so much, Zandile, what you based your decisions on. Maluta, in your article that I kind of used to base, the discussion on, you state, and I think we've had these conversations in many different settings, that the expected growth in the global population is expected to rise to 9 billion people by 2050, which will require that food production increases, you state, with about 70% to match the nutritional requirements for the future. Now, given this challenge, will conventional farming be able to produce the required food to feed double the number of people that we will have by 2050?
Yeah, it can. Yes, but you will require a lot of land. It's either two things. Either you expand horizontally or you sort of expand in terms of the yields. But that requires a lot of money and innovation and all those things. But also there's also other factors around the climate, the drought or other natural hazards like hail and all those things that affect farmers. So they are always at the mercy of the environment, basically. Whereas obviously with protected or environmentally controlled systems, like in terms of vertical farming or things like Zandile is doing, so they are sort of cushioned from those, but obviously, there are costs involved to be able to do that in terms of energy and other things. So I think when you look at it, open sort of systems like conventional farming, traditional farming has place, but so is things like closed systems, environmentally protected or controlled environments have their own space. But to be able to solve for the growing population and the nutritional requirements, those systems need to work together, because I don't think you will be able to achieve what we want to do from a nutritional and fiber for that matter. Because there's been experiments that have been done, and there's like ag-tech companies like Infarm and Plenty and Aero Farms that are doing experiments. But if you read those things, you also start to see in terms of the cost implications, in terms of the capex required to set up those things. It's very expensive, and the models are very demanding in terms of money, and you need to manage every line item quite well, to the decimal, to be able to make money out of those things. And there's also other crops that become quite difficult to grow under those spaces, like the grains, like maize. Imagine maize under or vertical farming or environmentally controlled spaces. So it becomes quite difficult. So that's why in my article I do say that my view is that those two systems need to complement each other. The other thing around traditional systems is that what you're seeing now, what I hate to or don't like, maybe hate is a strong word, when you're driving on the N1s or in Mpumalanga and all those places where you can see these guys now, they are starting to debush, lands that have been, unutilized for so long, and there's like habitat for biodiversity and species and all that. So you want to, at this point, we shouldn't be doing that anymore. We should look for ways in which we become more productive, more efficient, increase our yields. And then if then there's then limitations, then we need to start exploring other sort of farming systems like, vertical farming.
Thank you so much. It's not to isolate the two or separate it completely, but seeing how we marry these two practices and make it better for everyone in the long run. Professor Nodie-Malan, just your take on this question and response to how you see us moving towards this future, and obviously this very real future that we will have to deal with.
Yes, thank you. And, I agree with Maluta very much there. There's just one little factor in the equation that we need to keep an eye on. The projection that we need, double the food in 20x or whatever, is all based on the kinds of diets that we have. We're kind of eating a bit too much meat, and we are feeding food that could be eaten by people, and we're feeding animals. And that is actually where the problem of food insecurity and hunger lies, is the amount of food we give to animals and how we construct our own diets. So that's maybe a topic for another discussion somewhere else. But we certainly need to increase controlled environment agriculture. It is also appropriate for urban areas, and it brings benefits in terms of the localization of food production. And also that can also create different kinds of marketing and production systems. So someone like Zandile, I would be surprised if she sells back to the fresh produce market. If I am able to produce close to urban areas, stick a retail business next to my farming business and make the two feed each other. And in that way, get the highest possible retail price for my vertical farm. And that is actually, I think, maybe the way in which the whole equation around food security, hunger, and agriculture is going to change in the way that people appreciate the opportunity to produce food close to where it's consumed. And of course, vertical farming is the one for that.
And this is obviously something that you drive home in many of the engagements that we've had. It's around rethinking the system and how we think it works and how we can change that to better work for our needs, and ensuring that we do that with this long-term goal in mind. And thank you so much just for adding that once again. I think I want to get just Zandile's take on, the type of advantages and drawbacks. Maybe we can start with some of the advantages of her operation. And she obviously has an opportunity or an idea of how, from both sides, because she did transition from conventional to vertical. Maybe just some of the advantages firstly, and then some of the drawbacks that you're currently dealing with. Thanks.
Yes, I'd just like to agree with Prof. Nodie with the issue of being able to combine the farming with your market, basically, if I am to put it straight. We are doing that model basically by actually do farming on the rooftop of a shopping center and directly supplying into the restaurants, into the shopping center. So then they get fresh produce and they get to appreciate how the value of food and the nutritious food is grown. Just to go to the questions that Dawn gave me, just on the advantages, I think most of us know about the advantages of hydroponic like that it can give us more yields. You can recirculate your water, making you help be able to save on the water consumption that you're using, and being able to actually produce a good quality of vegetables because you're under protection, and reducing on the risk of your soil-borne diseases. Most people little do know about the drawbacks of actually having a hydroponic farm. First things first is that it's a high initial investment, because setting up a vertical or a hydroponic farm requires significant upfront capital investment. The infrastructure, including the lighting systems, if you are wanting to put in LED light, or environmental controls, and vertical growing structures can be expensive to actually set up. So the cost of energy for maintaining controlled environment can also be substantial at some point. These factors can make vertical farming economically challenging for some farmers or businesses to actually venture into it. The other side of things is that it is a high energy consumption farming practice, because it relies heavily on energy, because without any energy, or if you don't have any backup of solar panels, or if you are not connected to a generator or don't have any energy power source, if Eskom goes out, you might suffer from being able to irrigate your plants, unless if you're using much more better innovative ways that some other manufacturers are coming with, that actually some people are designing hydroponic farms that basically don't need a pump, but then they haven't been done commercially. So if you want to do things commercially, sometimes the energy consumption is very important, and also the technical expertise around it, because operating such a farm requires knowledge about what hydro is and the technical expertise behind it. So farmers need to understand the complexity of systems such as hydroponics, the lighting, the environmental controls, the IoT of things, and all sorts of technical knowledge behind it to be able to get yourself to an agri-tech level. So acquiring and maintaining the necessary expertise can be a challenge for newcomers to the field, because it's unlikely for you to get a fully fledged hydroponic training or a course that will be able to get into much details about what hydro is.
Thank you so much, Zandile. And I think it's so amazing that you're able to share, and that's what this platform is all about. Maluta, you were able to discover some of this magic, as you describe it, when you visited Can Agri. Maybe you can just talk about what you discovered, what your take was, and just more about your experience at the South African Vertical Farming Company. They're based in Pretoria. Maybe you can just talk more about that. And if you share, obviously you share some of Zandile's sentiments, and maybe just more about that experience. Thanks.
Obviously, I have not been to Zandile's farm, but I'm open to invitations. The farm that I visited, Can Agri, it was part of initiatives in the bank that I was busy with, that I was leading in terms of urban farming. So the bank wanted to do something around that. Part of the process was to visit like a real-life case company that is doing it. So they talk to the owner or management, learn about how it works and everything. And we did that. I think when I wrote that article, it was immediately after I had visited that operation. And it was quite impressive in terms of talking to those guys, and some of these challenges that Zandile just spoke about now. I mean, those are real life stuff. If I can just also add, it's also about, you can't just decide to do, for example, lettuce, which is always ones that people will pick, or strawberries or whatever. We need to it needs to be a market. But what I discovered, that farm was around, they've got every little detail sorted out, from their own nursery where they plant the seeds of the different varieties of lettuce in this sort of materials, not soil, I don't know what to call it. I think they call it soot or seed, something like that. And they sort of grow that, and then after it's ready, and then they sort of transplant it to the farm, the vertical farm. Things around water is sort of recycled, and then at the basement, they've got a whole thing around how they sort of treat it, as well as add chemicals, in terms of fertilizer and other things, how they deal with bacteria. I don't know if it's oxygen or something, but they sort of pump certain chemicals or things to deal with bacteria, because it can build up, because it's closed environment. And then there's like a packing facility there, and then they are also close to the market. So the footprint is quite key there. And they also don't really have any capex. So in terms of their emissions, it's very minimal. And the labor there is guys that they've sort of, from the local area there, where they are based, that sort of works there, and they've been there from the time they were constructing the facility or the farm. And it's quite technical, you know. It makes agriculture look cool, if I can put it that way. You know, those guys are wearing white coats and they're wearing gumboots and they've got things on their heads, and so it's quite protected. It's pristine in terms of how it is kept. So it was quite interesting in terms of it was, for me, it was the first my first experience as such a farm, because I've been to the conventional farms and I know all this type of farms, or even like if it's environmental control, it probably was like a greenhouse, you know, or a broiler farm, you know. But those things, that's what I'm used to. Maybe, you know, the broiler industry has been ahead of its time for some time. But when it comes to like things that have to do with fresh produce and the level of sophistication, it was definitely quite eye-opening. But I mean, the other thing that is to do with, you know, vertical farming and these sophisticated systems is that from a funding perspective or banking perspective, the banks are not there yet. That's why most of these things are funded from investors, like you know, venture capitalists and all those things, because the way banks are still set up, you know, collateral is still key. If there's not lend, then the actual you know, units, like for example, if you're funding a car, the car itself, it is collateral. That's why most people are able to buy cars even if they don't have land, because you can, a bank can take possession of that should you not be able to pay it back. But when it comes to these types of farming systems, they are not. It's not like you can repossess it and sell it. You know, the resale value is very low, so it's very difficult for banks to see, to look at such things as investable or fundable opportunities, because you need to be relying on the expertise. You need to rely on the number of things, of which, should anything go wrong, then what are you gonna do? Because if you repossess it after maybe you lent 10 million to that project, you're probably gonna get a fraction of that, and that's not a space in which banks wants to operate. To be honest, so that's another disadvantage of this thing. That's why most of them, you find that they are funded on that side, especially from the capex side. The working capital and whatever, that can be funded because you then take the actual produce as security, the cession of the contracts that, for example, they would have with the retail markets or wherever. You can then at least be able to cover that. But the actual setting up, which is the most important, then that's where the problem is.
Thank you, Maluta, for that context. And I mean, I actually know one farmer that was based in, I think he was based in Soweto, that a specific bank supported, but unfortunately he also had some issues, and maybe some of the challenges that we've spoken about that Zandile also mentioned, and he also went under. So that is a bit of a challenge, and I can understand where, you know, you're coming from in that way. Let's bring Professor Naudé back into the conversation. Professor, maybe just again, you know, your take and your experience with, you know, some of the advantages and drawbacks, and maybe you can actually compare the two in that way. Thanks, Professor.
Thanks, man. But please call me Mashudu Impendulo. You know, there's the previous speakers were right. It's capital intensive, but it's because vertical farming is technologically intensive. But bear in mind, there's a lot of people who construct chicken coops above the pigsty, and the pigs eat the chicken litter. And, you know, so a lot of these guys, they tinker with building a complete ecosystem in a vertical space. And that's what aquaponics is, where the fish and the fish litter feeds vegetables, and the vegetables drips into the fish pond, or flows from the vegetables to the fish. So it's really these guys trying to design a workable ecosystem that creates food. And the most interesting example I've come across is the Rondeel Eieren. It's an egg factory that produces a couple of million eggs a year. But what they did is they designed the whole factory, and you can see it on the internet, Rondeel. It's in the Netherlands, so it's Dutch, almost like Afrikaans, Rondeel. And they designed the whole factory around the natural behavior of the chicken. So the factory has almost no workers. And it's classified as free range due to the fact that the whole inside of the factory is modeled around what chickens would do. So where they sleep and lay eggs are upstairs, and they naturally go there at night. At the bottom, there's enough space for them to walk around. There's space outside, which is because it's a circle. The factory is also in a circle. And the circle is wooded, so it's a woodland. And they also have perches every 5 to 15 meters or so for the cocks to stand on. And if each cock has his own perch, they don't fight. And so that works for them. And the interesting thing in the retail level, what they did is they sell the eggs not in dozens, but in sevens for one a day. So together with the design of the factory around the natural behavior of the chicken, and it uses the chicken manure heats the factory, so it is so well designed. But they took the design principles right from production, right to the retail level. So you buy your Rondeel eggs in a pack of 7, one per day for the week. Isn't that interesting?
Absolutely amazing, Professor. Listen, this is an interactive space. So if you have any questions for our speakers, please do grab the mic and I'll give you the floor. We have a few more minutes before we wrap up the conversation. And I think we've covered just about everything that I wanted to ask around, the topic. So I'm going to maybe just give last round to all of my speakers. I was hoping to get Kaya on board as well, but I don't see him in the space. Kaya, if you're here, grab the mic so I can maybe just give you a chance to speak. I think he may be missing tonight's session. I see Gugu's also here. Gugu, it's so great to have you with me and thank you for joining me. Maybe we can even just give some insights, in terms of your production and how you do things. But for now, Maluta, just last and final comments from your side, and then Zandile, and then I'll give over to Professor Naudé.
So I was saying that the agricultural space is so dynamic. I mean, there's so much that is going on and so much that's still coming. If you check what's happening around precision agriculture, what those mechanization companies are doing, what's happening with, the egg marketplaces in terms of things that are being done by the likes of Hello Choice and Nile and, all these guys. It's quite exciting. It's making the space quite inclusive. It's making the space quite efficient and productive. And what obviously these, innovative farming systems are doing, they are now gonna help to be able to, first of all, in terms of availability of food year round. So in terms of obviously in environmentally controlled farming spaces, you are able to produce spinach all year round. And other stuff that maybe they are seasonally, based, or you can only do them at a certain period in time. You are able to do, and the growth period is also much shorter, because those produce get the nutrients that they need where they need them, at the right time, so they grow much quicker. And also they can also enhance in terms of the nutrition of those things. I know some people are against such things in terms of genetically modifying these things. But with, in the environment in which you operate, sometimes it's good, sometimes to then add those things so that, because people don't have money to buy different types of foods to get what they need to survive. So I think that's good. But I mean, I just enjoy the sector because there's so much that can be done. and there's so much that's on the way. And if you look at things that are happening, I usually track in terms of what's happening in the VC space, in terms of with Finistere Ventures and with AgFanda. Then you start seeing the trends in terms of what's happening in terms of indoor farming, in terms of plant sciences, animal sciences, marketplaces, and all those things. Then you start to see the trend and how much these guys are able to raise. But obviously, from a South African context, we don't have as much traction, but it does happen nonetheless. And we're starting to see things moving in that direction. And as climate change becomes a factor, farmers will always look for ways in which they can, be productive. And with the mix of load shedding, they're always looking for the ways in which they can be productive and efficient. Water scarcity is another thing. How do they become more useless with do more with less? And that's when you talk about precision, you talk about efficient irrigation systems. So I think for me, it's a good space to be in. And there's so much potential, especially for young ones, and also with the age of the farming community in terms of succession, becoming a factor which is above 60. So we need to start really, for food security perspective, we need to start seeing young people. And this type of tech and innovation, I think is what the sector needs to really attract people, because the narrative around agriculture and the images that are being shown on media of people always dirty and of a certain color and type, I think that needs to be phased out, because we need to start seeing the sector in a positive light. We need to change the narrative of the sector, that you can be black and you can still be a farmer, and you can be young and still be a farmer, etc., etc. So that's what we need. And for social cohesion perspective, we need to start seeing that. So I'm very passionate about the sector, and I've been in the sector for quite some time, but I also learn new things every day. But thanks for this session, Edon.
Thank you so much, Maluta, and I do appreciate your insights and for always being able to join and contribute to Food for Mzansi and our Farmers Inside Track listeners as well. So thank you so much. I see Gugu is grabbed the mic, one of my favorite farmers. Gugulethu Mahlangu, just your contributions and maybe just based on your experience within aquaculture and transitioning. Did you transition? I'm not sure actually. I've always known you to be in aquaculture.
I've always been into aquaponics, and I'm pretty sure you wrote the article about aquaponics.
I know for sure, but maybe in your past life, I don't know.
No, but I am learning about the aquaculture space, because you tend to realize that aquaponics is aquaculture plus farming plants. So the aquaculture is a big section that you really need to immerse yourself in. But just to give my contributions with the vertical farming replacing conventional farming, first of all, I don't think anything will ever replace conventional farming. I see it as an alternative, and I think it's a great alternative in the South African context, because I think Maluta was alluding to how, banks are also starting to take notice, and it's getting everybody excited in terms of food security and different ways we employment and also reduce our carbon footprint. So I guess my contribution, and also just a question to the speakers, is I heard Maluta say that even with vertical farming, and I'm just going to say smart farming, there isn't a certainty factor, because when you look at vertical farming, I mean, you can buy the towers from Alibaba now. I think they're like $8,000, 1 square meter. You can get 50 lettuce heads from it. It's a kind of a guaranteed system when you look at vertical farming, when you look at smart farming in general. So how are the banks, not catching on sooner? And why is it still kind of a red tape around smart farming? Because the whole idea is to kind of sell data, and the data when it comes to conventional farming and smart farming 80% in terms of surety when it comes to smart farming. You are guaranteed produce. So I just would like to pose this question to our speakers in terms of, do they have challenges in terms of acquiring funding to build a facility like an aquaponics farm? Because I know in my experience, it's not impossible to do. It's not something that, they consider like a huge risk. In fact, they're quite excited about it. I think the only difference is when it comes to selling aquaponics produce or selling vertical farming produce, that's when you're competing with the guys from conventional farming. And then you realize that, the amount of money, the capex that you invested building this high facility doesn't set you apart really, because, your 15 Rand lettuce is also worth.
Thank you so much, Gugu. And I think it's something that Maluta touched on before. And I mean, he's a banker, so perfect one to respond.
Yeah.
So Maluta, do you want to take this one?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, like I said, the capex side is a bit difficult, to fund, because the resale value of those plants, it's very difficult. It's almost specialized, and each one is different in terms of size and what it can do and the tech, so it's always difficult. But from a production, finance and working capital perspective, banks do fund those, because we do recognize that someone will have a contract and cash flow is constant because they sort of are delivering on their contracts, as agreed. So we don't have a problem with that. The issue still remains around funding the establishment of these operations, basically, which is why I was saying that mostly are funded by venture capital or, other people out there that see this as a disruption and as an opportunity from an equity and growth scale perspective. But I think it's still stuck. These things usually you find that it's just one, and it becomes difficult especially in South Africa, for them to expand into other regions or even within the space in which they are operating, because people, there's still hesitancy in terms of them being sustainable. That's a very interesting one, because what all they are trying to do is to be sustainable, but in terms of being able to scale and also profitability, sometimes it becomes a problem. So that's just the situation, and I feel like banks need to come to a situation where they start to change that mindset, start to see value, and have different models where maybe if someone fails, then they pick someone who's more capable, that have got the technical skills, because it's quite highly technical, and be able to deliver in that manner. Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Maluta. Zandile, would you maybe like to also just comment on this one? I mean, where and how you source funding for your operations and things. Maybe just to touch on that briefly, and then I'm going to ask you also just to add your final comments to that, and then last one to the Prof.
You know what Maluta said and Gugu said, it's quite true that when we enter as vertical farmers or hydroponic farmers, it's quite a new concept and we can't actually get the funding around it. So like if you go venture capitalist, then private investment is the best way to go, because for us, we do partnerships. That's what we've been doing throughout our businesses, and it's been working quite well to actually do that. But you need to find a partner that is aligned with your interest or with your goals, to want to be able to produce food on their properties or on their spaces. So it's quite a difficult industry, but we're hoping soon that most financial departments will open up and start exploring to start helping out upcoming hydroponic farmers in the space. Just in my closure of should vertical farming replace conventional farming, for me, I believe that it won't replace it, but it should work in hand, because I believe it is an increasingly recognized that more sustainable and diverse approaches to agriculture is needed to meet the future food demand. This includes implementing practices such as precision agriculture, vertical farming, hydroponic, aquaponics like Gugu does, and other innovative farming techniques that come in within the innovation space for agri-tech. So additionally, just promoting dietary changes and reducing on food waste and improving distribution systems can contribute to addressing the food demand. So just in summary, in closure on my side is that exploring and implementing sustainable agricultural practices and innovative solutions within these spaces is crucial to ensure that food security in the future it is secured. So that's my closure there. And Maluta, we will send out an invitation soon.
Thank you. I've been waiting.
Oh, I love it. Professor, just your last comments and wrap up the conversation.
As a way to address the concerns Gugulethu spoke about, I just want to say to all the people who want to do this, the easiest hydroponic farming I've seen was people used old buckets, fill them with river sand, plant the plant, and water twice a day with a salt solution. As simple as that. But I also want to say to Gugulethu and to farmers, they really got to understand how agricultural markets are structured. I'm not going to say they are rigged, but they are bloody close to be rigged. And they are not only rigged, they are also dominated by very, very large firms. And this is why banks are reluctant to get into it, is because new farmers are up against giants. And it is really, really difficult to break into that. And farmers must take a look at the Marketing of Agricultural Products Act and take a look at how this whole global system, because the same system that regulates our market is replicated in all the major developing countries. And that whole system is geared to export food mainly to Europe, so that they have food security. And of course, they pay for it. And that is what drives the whole agricultural market. The commercial farmers in South Africa have mastered that system. They know it. They can play that game because they have big lands, they have capital, and their numbers are shrinking and they are getting bigger. So, I don't have any easy solutions, but got to really take a look at how these markets are structured. And it explains why you got to be big to make a difference. So you either got to go big and compete and play that game, or you got to change the game and start playing at the urban retail level.
Thank you so much. And as always, I have a million other ideas for conversations that we could be having on this platform just by having you in this space, Professor. So thank you so much for that and for constantly making us think and rethink and come up with innovative ideas and solutions to how we produce our food and where we find the market for it and how we continually try to be better and do better daily. So thank you so much for that. We've come to the end of tonight's session. Thank you so much to everyone who joined. Apologies for the connectivity issues in the beginning. From my side, your host, Donumdu. Have a great rest of the evening and thank you once again for joining me. Bye-bye for now.